Hey, what's going on? Welcome to the Podcast Accelerator, the thrice weekly show that brings you podcast education, industry insights, and straight talking reactions to podcasting news. I'm your host, Mark Asquith, that British podcast guy and CEO and co-founder here at Rebel Base Media, the podcast tech company that creates the Podcast Success Academy, podcast websites, Productivity, Rebel Base Studios, and Captivate.fm, the world's only growth-oriented podcast host, where you can get your first month of podcast hosting for just $1 and transfer an existing podcast in completely for free. So go ahead and check it out now at Captivate.fm. Now, today on the show, we're going to dig into the announcements that have just finished at Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference. We talked about this last week, actually, on a bonus episode that Kieran and I did. Apple's WWDC, Worldwide Developer Conference, has just taken place. I'm recording this moments after it has completed. And I'm going to recap every single announcement that is relevant to us as podcasters. And we can discuss that further on future episodes. I want to give you the up to the minute kind of information on what Apple has just announced. All right. But before I do that, just a quick reminder that the amazing team at Aweber is still giving you 90 days completely for free to try their wonderful email marketing platform. That's right. You can learn how to engage your audience. You can learn how to get listener feedback. You can learn how to build raving fans that will do and help you in any way that you want, that you can build friendships with, that you can monetize through. All right. As a podcaster, it is vital to do this. Aweber are there to help. So please go and check Aweber out at markasquith.com/Aweber. So iTunes is gone. iTunes is gone. That's right. In a move that has been speculated and guarded terribly for a long while now, Apple has just announced the breakup of iTunes in favor of 3 new apps that includes Apple Podcasts for your desktop. Also, they announced a far better podcast search experience. It's really interesting stuff. Now, I'm going to go through these announcements one by one. I'm going to dig into them maybe a little bit and just kind of give my initial reaction to them and then probably dig into them as the Podcast Accelerator goes on over the next few days. So the big ones, really, there were a few little ones that I'll get to at the end, but the big ones, really, were that with Mac OS Catalina, that's the new name for the new Mac OS, Catalina, which I don't know what that accent was. It was terrible. It's a beautiful name. Mac OS Catalina. They are now splitting out iTunes. And they made a few jokes, actually, at the keynote about really the fact that iTunes have become everything. They made a few jokes about, we should include a calendar, we should include the mail app and put it all in iTunes. They made a kind of a point of poking fun at the fact that when you plug your phone into your computer, no longer will anything appear. You just sync your phone up via the Finder app now, which is perfect. And they made a real, they made a real kind of a real light situation of this. So they announced that they were splitting iTunes up because it had become a behemoth of features. It had become so, I guess it had become so cumbersome and stuff with features, trying to do so much for everyone, including video. Remember, it was including video, and it became a little bit silly. So they've split it out now, which is interesting because obviously Spotify is one audio ecosystem, but now Apple has 2 audio ecosystems and a third for TV. So they're splitting iTunes up into Apple Music, Apple TV, and Apple Podcasts. Now, this is very interesting because we know that desktop listening is on the rise, apparently. And we assume that people are listening on YouTube or in iTunes or Spotify or whatever, whilst they're working or doing whatever they're doing on their computers. Well, Apple Podcasts is a dedicated app for doing just that in Mac OS Catalina. And the fun thing with this is that even though right now it doesn't look like they've announced that many features, I'm willing to bet that when we look at the spec for Apple Podcasts, there will be a little more in there than was announced. So that's interesting to wonder what's going to be coming. It's also interesting to know that actually Apple Podcasts now has probably got its own release roadmap. So what that means is that podcast-specific features can and probably will be released as the year or the years progress. Now, that can only be a great thing because the iOS apps, the iPad apps, which goes along with the new iPad OS, by the way, they've released a new iPad OS, which is built on top of iOS, so it's slightly different. This means that the podcast ecosystem could have its own developmental roadmap, which means that they're probably taking podcasting a little more seriously, which I think is wonderful. I think it's superb that they're able to do this and they're splitting this out and they're on the way to giving podcasters more attention. That can only be a good thing. So now we have a dedicated app that is hopefully going to serve over the longer term a better experience for podcasters. Now, the other thing that they did, outside of the fact that who knows what else you're going to be able to do inside the Apple Podcasts app on the desktop when it's launched, it's just intriguing and interesting that they now have given it its own roadmap. What else can they do with this? It's exciting. But the biggest thing that they announced for Apple Podcast is that discoverability is getting better. Now, when you used to search a podcast directory, so Apple Podcasts, do you remember we all kicked off about episode numbers and them wanting to, banners for putting episode numbers in our titles? And I mentioned the fact that they were just cleaning their catalog up ready for this Apple Podcasts app because they'll now be able to give us a better experience with better episode numbers. As a precursor to that, they did that thing where they were clearing out the author names. A lot of people were stuffing subtitles and author names with guests that they'd had on and other kind of keywords because the subtitle, the author field, the title of the podcast, episode title, they were the only things really that mattered in Apple Podcast search. Well, they were cleaning house when they told us to do that, when they told us to get rid of the author names and the kind of keyword stuffing in the author names. They were cleaning house, and the reason for that is that they have just announced that discoverability is getting better when it comes to the new version of Apple Podcast, because what they're doing is the exact same thing that we talked about on the bonus episode about what Google are doing. Have they just changed podcast SEO forever? Apple has just announced that they will, behind the scenes, they're not going to give you this, they will behind the scenes use machine learning to transcribe your podcast and use that transcription in their new search algorithms. So that means they're doing the same as Google. Google transcribe your audio, they don't give you the transcription, we don't need that. But what they're doing is when you search for podcasts, they are searching that audio to match keywords and to give you a better, more relevant experience. Now, this is exciting because now 2 of the big 3 do this. Google and Apple do this. Google and Apple now do this. So discoverability is getting better. Spotify will probably follow suit very, very soon. But in particular, the thing that's interesting with this is that, like I said, it adds a little bit of mystique and a little bit of kind of wonderment about what they are going to do next. What are they going to do next? Discoverability is a big thing in podcasting, and Apple has taken a big step to upgrade the entire industry by joining Google in making your search algorithm much, much better. So that is huge. This is a new dawn of podcast SEO, all right? I believe this. This is a new dawn of podcast SEO. All right? Mark my words. So they're the big announcements for podcasts. There are a couple of things that were interesting alongside that, which I think will impact podcasting. Number one out of the other category was that there's now a streaming audio API for Apple Watch and an independence from the iPhone, which means that actually this could be huge for podcasting. We can independently stream audio over to our Apple Watch. iOS 13 has been announced, which now gives you audio sharing on AirPods. So, like you used to have the dual headphone splitter on your Walkman. You can now do that, listen to audio with friends. Of course, you can listen to podcasts now with friends, presumably, which is awesome. HomePod handoff is fantastic for continuous listening. So again, just like Google does, Google Home does, if you listen on one device and you walk in, and let's say, for example, you've been listening on CarPlay, you walk in to your house, your phone is detected as it walks past the HomePod and will continue to play the podcast that you've been listening to, which is fantastic, all right? That's a really good move. And another interesting thing was, this is only a kind of peripheral thing, was that they've now got the iPad OS. So they've split out the iPad operating system from iOS to give the iPad its own experience. And they've given desktop class experiences to things like WordPress, which was always a pain in the backside, frankly. You didn't have the full experience on many web apps or many apps that you had on a desktop. So that was a pure stopper for people wanting to use the iPad as a desktop experience. Well, they've now just announced desktop class experiences, which means production and editing and publishing probably will get easier now for podcasters on iPad. So that's a big deal as well. It's not a huge deal right now, but it kind of just sets the tone for where the future is going, I think, for the iPad. So that's quite interesting to me. So look, this is a step in the right direction. They didn't do anything with bonus content. They didn't do anything with new tags. Maybe that's coming in the future. I don't know. But ultimately, they are stepping in the right direction. 2 out of the 3 big podcast outlets now transcribe your audio and make that searchable. That in itself is huge. We now have a desktop app for podcast listening, which, again, has its own product roadmap. Who knows what will be coming down the wire from there. So very, very interesting. I'm sure there'll be so many people in the podcast world saying that there wasn't enough in podcasting, but hey, you can only do so much. And look, at least we're getting something. We're getting attention. The industry on the whole is developing and moving forward, all right? It's really, really interesting time to be a podcast. Now, I truly believe that we are entering the new dawn of podcast SEO, all right? So thank you so much for joining me here on the Podcast Accelerator. Remember to tell all of your podcasting friends that the show is available to listen to for free in any app, including Apple Podcasts on the desktop, but any app that supports podcasts. And if you're wondering what the best next step to take for your own podcast is, whether you're a new or a veteran podcaster, go ahead and take our short 5-minute survey where I'm going to help you to diagnose and solve the main issue holding you and your show back. All right? But not only am I going to do that, I'm going to give you access to our free and very, very vibrant Podcast Rebellion community, weekly free group coaching from me and the team here at Rebel Base Media, actionable insider-only emails, and even a free invitation to the Podcast Success Academy. And to do all of that and receive all of that good stuff, plus the solution to the biggest thing that's holding your show back, all you have to do is take 5 minutes to grow your podcast by heading to rebelbasemedia.io/grow. And until next time, never forget, the more you expect from yourself, the more you will excel.